Venezuela, grappling with political turmoil and economic hardship, held its presidential election on July 29, 2024. The election was pivotal. Incumbent President Nicolás Maduro faced a united opposition. The stakes were high. The election could alter Venezuela's future. Maduro sought a third term. The opposition saw him as an autocrat. They blamed him for hyperinflation and food shortages. The election was a referendum on Maduro's rule. The world watched closely. It was a test of Venezuela's democracy. As the results of the election began to trickle in, it became clear that the outcome would be highly contested. The National Electoral Council, which is widely seen as being under the control of Maduro, declared him the winner. They announced that he had secured over 51% of the vote. The opposition, however, cried foul. They alleged widespread irregularities and claimed victory for their candidate, Edmundo González Urrutia. The opposition's claims of victory were based on their own internal tallies. They asserted that González Urrutia had garnered a decisive 70% of the vote. This stark discrepancy between the official results and the opposition's claims immediately raised alarm bells. It cast a long shadow of doubt over the legitimacy of the election. The international community watched with bated breath as the situation unfolded. The opposition's allegations of irregularities were wide-ranging. They included reports of voter intimidation, ballot stuffing, and manipulation of the electoral rolls. They also accused the National Electoral Council of lacking transparency and independence. International observers echoed these concerns, noting that the election had fallen short of international standards. The disputed election took place against a backdrop of a devastating economic crisis in Venezuela. The country has been mired in recession for years. Its economy has been crippled by hyperinflation, corruption, and mismanagement. This dire economic situation has had a profound impact on the lives of ordinary Venezuelans. Millions of Venezuelans have been plunged into poverty. They struggle to afford basic necessities such as food, medicine, and housing. The country's healthcare system has collapsed. Its infrastructure is crumbling. This economic meltdown has fueled social unrest, political instability, and a mass exodus of citizens fleeing the crisis. The economic crisis has deepened the political divide in Venezuela. The opposition blames Maduro's socialist policies for the country's economic ruin. They argue that his government's mismanagement, corruption, and authoritarianism have destroyed the economy. Maduro, on the other hand, blames the country's economic woes on external factors. These include US sanctions and what he calls an economic war being waged against his government. The allegations of irregularities in the 2024 election were not isolated incidents. They were part of a broader pattern of electoral manipulation and authoritarian backsliding that has characterized Maduro's rule. In recent years, Venezuela has witnessed a steady erosion of democratic norms and institutions. This has raised serious concerns about the future of democracy in the country. One of the most egregious examples of electoral manipulation occurred in 2017. That year, Maduro held elections for a new legislative body, the Constituent Assembly. This was widely seen as an attempt to consolidate his power and sideline the opposition-controlled National Assembly. The elections were marred by widespread irregularities and were condemned by the international community as illegitimate. In the lead-up to the 2024 election, the Maduro government took a number of steps that further undermined the credibility of the electoral process. These included disqualifying key opposition candidates, restricting media freedom, and intimidating voters. The government also stacked the National Electoral Council with loyalists, ensuring that it would not act as an impartial arbiter. Section 5. A day of high emotions. Election day in Venezuela was marked by hope and trepidation. Long lines snaked around polling stations. Many saw the election as a chance for real change. They hoped for a better future. The atmosphere was tense. Security forces were deployed. They kept a watchful eye. Rumors swirled on social media. Despite tension, hope was in the air. Many were determined to make their voices heard. As polls closed, anticipation gripped the nation. Families gathered around their televisions, social media buzzed with activity. The nation held its breath. Section 6. International observers voice concerns. International observers played a crucial role in monitoring the 2024 Venezuelan presidential election. However, their observations painted a troubling picture of the electoral landscape. They highlighted numerous irregularities and raised serious concerns about the integrity of the vote. The EU expressed serious concerns about the fairness of the election. The Carter Center concluded the process did not meet international standards. Section 7. The shadow of authoritarianism. The disputed election in Venezuela has cast a long shadow over the country's future. It has raised profound questions about the future of democracy and the rule of law in the country. Maduro's victory, if it stands, will further cement his grip on power. It will likely lead to increased authoritarianism, human rights violations, and economic hardship. The opposition, weakened but defiant, has vowed to continue its fight for democracy. They have called for fresh elections and demanded that Maduro step down. However, given Maduro's control over the military and other key institutions, it remains to be seen how effective their efforts will be. The international community faces a difficult challenge in responding to the crisis in Venezuela. Some countries, particularly in Latin America, have recognized Maduro's victory and called for dialogue. Others, including the United States, have refused to recognize the results of what they consider a fraudulent election. Section 8. A divided international response. The international community's response to the disputed Venezuelan election was swift and divided. The United States, along with a number of other Western countries, immediately condemned the election as fraudulent and refused to recognize the results. They called for new elections and urged Maduro to step down. The US imposed additional sanctions on Venezuela, targeting key individuals and entities within the Maduro government. The European Union, while expressing concerns about the conduct of the election, stopped short of declaring it illegitimate. They called for dialogue between the government and the opposition and urged Maduro to address the irregularities identified by international observers. The EU also indicated that it would consider imposing targeted sanctions on Venezuelan officials if the situation did not improve. Latin American countries were split in their response. Some countries, such as Argentina, Chile and Colombia, condemned the election and recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela. Others, including Mexico, Bolivia and Nicaragua, recognized Maduro as the winner and called for a peaceful resolution to the crisis. Section 9. The economic fallout. The disputed election in Venezuela has worsened the economic crisis. Political instability has led to a decline in investor confidence. This has caused further depreciation of the bolivar and a spike in inflation. The economy is now on the brink of total disaster. The political crisis has disrupted oil production, Venezuela's main revenue source. US sanctions and mismanagement have crippled the oil industry. The economic crisis is devastating ordinary Venezuelans' lives. Section 10. The future of democracy in Venezuela. The disputed election in Venezuela has raised serious concerns about the future of democracy in the country. Maduro's consolidation of power, his crackdown on dissent, and his manipulation of the electoral process have eroded democratic institutions and norms. Venezuela is now widely considered to be an authoritarian state. It is unclear when or if democracy will be restored. The opposition, though weakened and divided, remains a potent force in Venezuelan politics. They have shown a remarkable ability to mobilize protests and challenge Maduro's rule. However, they face an uphill battle against a government that is determined to cling to power at all costs. The international community has a crucial role to play in supporting the Venezuelan people's aspirations for democracy. Continued pressure on the Maduro regime through sanctions and diplomatic isolation is essential to forcing him to the negotiating table. The international community must also provide humanitarian assistance to the millions of Venezuelans who are suffering as a result of the crisis. Section 11. A glimmer of hope. Despite the bleak outlook, there are some glimmers of hope for Venezuela. The opposition, though weakened, remains defiant. It continues to mobilize protests and demand free and fair elections. The international community, too, has shown a willingness to stand up to Maduro's authoritarianism. It has imposed sanctions and condemned his human rights abuses. The resilience of the Venezuelan people is another source of hope. Despite facing unimaginable hardship, they have not given up on their country. They continue to strive for a better future for themselves and their children. This spirit of resilience and determination is perhaps Venezuela's greatest asset as it navigates this dark chapter in its history. The path ahead for Venezuela will be long and arduous, but with continued pressure from within and outside the country, there is hope that a peaceful transition to democracy can be achieved. The international community must stand firm in its support for the Venezuelan people's aspirations for freedom and democracy.